Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Manga Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a warm amber glow through the living room window. Matt adjusted his tie, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. It was their anniversary, 15 years of marriage, with all its shared joys and struggles. Yet tonight, something felt off. Sophie appeared at the doorway, her dress shimmering under the dim light. "I was thinking," she began, her voice honey smooth. "Why don't we make this anniversary extra special? Let's invite a few friends over for dinner." Matt turned to face her, puzzled. Sophie had always preferred quieter celebrations, just the two of them, reminiscing over a bottle of wine. "Friends?" he repeated. "Who did you have in mind?" "Oh, just a few close ones," she said breezily, brushing a stray curl from her face. Her nonchalant tone was almost convincing. Almost. "There's someone new I think you'd enjoy meeting." Her words tugged at a thread of unease in Matt's mind. A new friend? Who was so important that Sophie wanted them at their anniversary dinner? He studied her face carefully, noting the slight flush in her cheeks and the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her dress. These weren't the actions of a wife excited to celebrate. These were the tells of someone hiding something. "All right," Matt said finally, masking his skepticism with a smile. "Let's do it." Footnote: Sophie's face brightened, though her enthusiasm seemed too eager. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before flitting out of the room, leaving behind a lingering scent of her favorite perfume. Matt's mind began to turn, piecing together fragments of recent oddities. Sophie's late-night texts, the way she guarded her phone more closely than usual, her sudden, unexplained absences. He'd brushed it off at first. She was social, charming, always had a circle of people around her. But this, inviting a stranger to their anniversary? It didn't fit. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Matt waited until Sophie was busy in the kitchen. Her phone lay unattended on the counter, screen lit with a notification. He hesitated. Trust had always been the foundation of their relationship. But trust worked both ways, didn't it? The name Jake stared back at him from the screen, along with a preview of the message. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll make sure to sit close." The words hit Matt like a gut punch. His hands trembled as he resisted the urge to read further. Instead, he stepped away, the seed of suspicion now fully rooted. This Jake wasn't just a friend, and tonight wasn't going to be the celebration Sophie had envisioned. He resolved then and there to play along, to let the evening unfold as planned. But this wouldn't be Sophie's triumph. It would be her undoing. The hours leading up to the anniversary dinner were a slow grind on Matt's nerves. He sat in his study, pretending to work, but his focus was entirely elsewhere. Sophie had always been meticulous in her planning, down to the floral arrangements for tonight's centerpiece. But this time she wasn't just organizing a celebration. She was orchestrating a deception, and Matt was determined to uncover the full extent of it. When he heard Sophie leave to pick up some last-minute essentials, he seized the opportunity. Her laptop sat open on the dining room table, its screensaver still swirling with muted colors. Matt knew the risks, violating her privacy, confirming his worst fears, but the message from Jake had left him little choice. Taking a deep breath, he moved the cursor and entered her password. It hadn't changed. The name of their dog, Buster, followed by their wedding year. A pang of bitterness hit him as he typed. How ironic. Her email inbox was clean, almost suspiciously so. But the sent folder told a different story. Messages to Jake were sparse, yet telling. Phrases like "can't wait to see you again" and "it'll be so much easier after tonight" leapt out at him. The real revelation came when he clicked on her calendar. Jake's name appeared in entries that seemed harmless at first. Coffee meetups, casual lunches. But one in particular made his heart drop. A hotel reservation for the following weekend. The details were clear. a 2-night stay at a boutique hotel on the other side of town. No ambiguity, no plausible deniability. Matt's chest tightened as he scrolled further. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer brazenness of it. Sophie had woven this affair into the fabric of their lives, hiding it in plain sight. He closed the laptop, forcing himself to remain calm. Confronting her now would be satisfying in the moment, but it wasn't enough. Sophie needed to feel the weight of her choices, to see the faces of those she'd deceived crumble when the truth came out, and Jake, whoever he was, wouldn't walk away unscathed either. Matt's next step was to arm himself with irrefutable proof. He returned to Sophie's phone, this time waiting until she was distracted in the kitchen. Quickly, he took a few photographs of the most incriminating messages and the hotel reservation. It wasn't his proudest moment, but pride had no place here. This was survival. When Sophie returned from her errands, she was all smiles, her movements light and carefree. "Everything's coming together perfectly," she chirped, arranging a fresh bouquet in the center of the table. "This is going to be a night to remember." "What did you want to say?" Matt forced a smile, his stomach churning at the irony. "I'm sure it will be," he said evenly, earning a pleased glance from her. As the day stretched into evening, Matt finalized his plan. He reached out to their closest friends, suggesting they arrive earlier than planned for a quick toast before dinner. They all readily agreed, unaware of the real reason for the request. He also did some research on Jake. Using Sophie's calendar entries and a bit of clever social media sleuthing, he identified the man, a local contractor they had met at a neighborhood event. Matt vaguely remembered him, tall, confident, always quick with a joke. He'd seemed friendly enough at the time, but now the man's smirk in his profile pictures grated on Matt like nails on a chalkboard. By the time guests began to arrive, Matt had transformed his simmering anger into cold calculation. He greeted everyone warmly, even Sophie, who was radiant in a deep green dress he hadn't seen before. "You look stunning," he told her, and it wasn't entirely a lie. She did look beautiful. But beauty couldn't mask betrayal. When Jake arrived, Matt felt a chill sweep through the room. The man was charming, disarming even, shaking hands and laughing easily. Sophie's demeanor changed subtly in his presence. Her laughter was a touch too bright, her glances a shade too frequent. No one else seemed to notice, but Matt saw it all. As the evening unfolded, Matt kept his tone light, his words measured. He played the role of the devoted husband to perfection, all while watching Sophie and Jake carefully. Every shared glance, every lingering smile, they were ammunition for the confrontation to come. When dinner was served, Matt took his place at the head of the table. "Before we begin," he said, raising his glass, "I'd like to say a few words. Tonight is about celebrating the bonds that hold us together. Love, trust, loyalty. But sometimes, those bonds are tested." Sophie froze mid-reach for her glass. Jake's confident smile faltered ever so slightly. Matt savored the moment. The game was just beginning. The table buzzed with conversation as laughter and the clink of wine glasses filled the air. Sophie, radiant in her emerald green dress, played the perfect hostess, gliding from guest to guest with practiced charm. To anyone else, this was a picturesque anniversary dinner, a loving couple celebrating their years together, surrounded by close friends and a warm, joyful ambience. But Matt knew better. Every moment, every word spoken by Sophie felt like a calculated performance, designed to distract from the truth. And then there was Jake. Positioned near Sophie at the table, he played his part well, leaning back with casual ease, his confident smirk betraying no sign of guilt. Yet Matt had seen enough in the subtle exchanges between the two to confirm what he already knew. They believed they were untouchable. Matt's mind churned beneath his calm exterior. He was no stranger to pressure, As an engineer, he had spent years troubleshooting systems and designing solutions. This situation was no different. The key was timing and precision. The truth would come out, but not as a chaotic confrontation. It would unfold methodically, ensuring there was no escape for Sophie or Jake. Halfway through the main course, Matt began to set his plan into motion. He raised his glass and tapped it lightly with his fork. The table quieted, all eyes turning to him. "I just want to take a moment," he began, his voice steady and composed, "to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to Sophie and me to share this milestone with you." His gaze rested on Sophie, whose smile wavered for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered. "To 15 years?" Sophie chimed in, lifting her glass, her voice ringing out a touch too brightly. "To 15 years," the table echoed. Glasses clinked, and a chorus of good-natured cheers followed. Matt waited for the noise to settle before continuing. "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "anniversaries are a time to reflect, not just on the good times, but also on the challenges we've faced and overcome together. And yes, him and Caroline, of course, had dealt with difficulties over the previous years, but preferred to be remembered as having been close to their loved ones." Sophie's smile tightened. Jake shifted in his chair, reaching for his drink, in what Matt noted was a reflexive attempt to cover his discomfort. "I've been thinking a lot about trust," Matt continued, letting the word linger in the air. "It's the foundation of any good relationship, isn't it? Whether it's a marriage, a friendship, or even a business partnership. Without trust, everything crumbles." The atmosphere at the table subtly shifted. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, sensing the shift in tone. Sophie's expression froze, her hand gripping the stem of her wine glass a little too tightly. Matt pressed on, keeping his tone light despite the weight of his words. "And trust isn't something you can fake or patch together. It has to be genuine, earned, and maintained. Don't you agree, Jake?" Jake blinked, caught off guard by the sudden attention. He hesitated for a split second before nodding. Yeah, absolutely." Sophie's gaze darted to Jake, then back to Matt, her polished composure beginning to fray. "What's this about, Matt?" she asked with a forced laugh. "You're making it sound like a TED Talk." Matt smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just reflecting, that's all," he said smoothly. "But since we're on the subject of trust, let me share a story." He reached beneath his chair and pulled out an envelope he had prepared earlier. The act was deliberate, drawing every eye at the table. He placed the envelope on the table in front of him, tapping it lightly with his finger. "This," Matt said, his voice calm yet deliberate, "represents something I stumbled upon recently. Something that made me question a lot of things I thought I understood." Sophie's face paled, her fingers now visibly trembling as she set her glass down. "Matt," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Relax, darling," Matt said, his words razor-sharp despite their outward warmth. "This is a celebration after all. But I think it's only fair to share what I've discovered with everyone here, since we're all such close friends." The guests looked on in stunned silence, their confusion and curiosity palpable. Jake, however, was no longer smirking. His confident facade had crumbled into unease, his eyes darting between Matt and Sophie. Matt opened the envelope and removed a stack of printed screenshots and photographs. He held up the first image, a text exchange between Sophie and Jake. "This is what trust looks like," he said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Honest, heartfelt communication. The air in the room thickened as the weight of Matt's revelation sank in. Sophie's friends, who moments ago had been laughing and chatting, now stared at her in shock. Jake looked as though he wanted to disappear. Matt didn't stop. He moved to the next piece of evidence, a photo of the hotel reservation, complete with Sophie's name and Jake's credit card information. "And here," Matt said, holding the paper up for all to see, "is what trust really looks like." "Matt, please." "Save it," Matt snapped. his calm demeanor finally giving way to a hint of anger. "This isn't about you explaining. It's about everyone here seeing the truth." The room was deathly silent, the weight of the betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Sophie looked as if she might faint, while Jake sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "I thought tonight was about celebrating what we've built," Matt concluded, his voice steady but cold. "But I see now it's about tearing down the illusions we've been living under." The third act of Matt's plan was complete. The stage was set, and the fallout was only beginning. The air in the dining room had shifted entirely. The earlier warmth and camaraderie had dissolved, replaced by an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the clinking of a nervous hand against a wineglass. All eyes were on Matt, who sat at the head of the table, his calm yet commanding presence radiating through the room. In front of him lay the damning evidence, a collection of messages, photos, and receipts that told a story none of the guests had been prepared to hear. Sophie's once rosy complexion had turned an ashen gray, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Her lips moved as if trying to form words, but no sound came out. Across from her, Jake, who had spent the earlier part of the evening exuding smug confidence, now sat rigidly, his face drained of its color. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Matt," Sophie's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what, Sophie?" Matt interrupted, his tone razor-sharp but still eerily composed. "That you decided to celebrate our anniversary by bringing the man you've been sneaking around with? Or that you thought I'd be too blind, too stupid to notice?" He leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze locked on her. "Go ahead, I'm all ears." Sophie's lips quivered as tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like," she began, her voice pleading. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Matt let out a bitter laugh, cutting her off. "Didn't mean for what to happen? The months of secret meetings, the hotel bookings, the texts telling him how much you can't wait to see him?" He picked up one of the printed screenshots, holding it up for the table. "You make me feel alive again." "Your words, Sophie, not mine." The guests exchanged shocked glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just a marital dispute. It was a public reckoning. Sophie's closest friends, the ones she had carefully curated over the years, now stared at her with a mix of disbelief and quiet judgment. No one dared to speak, the weight of the moment too heavy. Jake, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Look," he said, attempting to adopt a conciliatory tone. "This isn't the time or place for—" "The time or place," Matt snapped, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to dictate that, Jake. Not here, not now." His voice was a low growl, the kind of tone that silenced even the most confident of men. "You came into my home, sat at my table, drank my wine, on the night meant to celebrate my marriage. And you think you get a say in this?" Jake flinched, his bravado slipping further. "It was a mistake," he muttered. "Things got out of hand." "A mistake," Matt repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you've done, what both of you have done, is a betrayal. A calculated, deliberate betrayal." Sophie buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled by her palms. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Matt," she cried. "I never wanted it to get this far." Matt's jaw tightened. "And yet here we are." He turned his gaze back to the stunned guests. "I invited all of you here tonight because you're supposed to be the people closest to us, the ones who know and care about our lives. I wanted to celebrate our life together, to honor 15 years of marriage. Instead, I've had to reveal the lies and deceit that have poisoned what I thought was a partnership." The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of the revelations. One of Sophie's friends, a woman named Laura, finally broke it. "Sophie, she said softly, her voice trembling. "Is it true? Were you really?" Sophie's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a picture of desperation. "I didn't plan for this," she insisted, her voice rising. "Jake and I—" She faltered, glancing at the man who now avoided her gaze. "It just happened." Matt shook his head slowly. "It didn't just happen, Sophie. You don't just happen to send dozens of texts. You don't just happen to book secret getaways. These were choices, every single one of them." Jake shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Look, Matt, I know this is bad." "Fry the boat." "Bad?" Matt's voice was icy. "Jake, bad is spilling red wine on a white tablecloth. What you've done, that's not bad. It's disgusting." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Matt wasn't done. "And let me be clear," he said, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Matt shook his head repelled, though he clearly didn't want to say why. "No time." He turned to the guests, his tone softening, but his words no less firm. "I apologize to all of you for having to witness this, but I couldn't let this lie continue, not in front of the people who were supposed to know us best. The truth needed to come out." The guests murmured their awkward understanding, some nodding, others looking away. Sophie's sobs grew louder, her once composed exterior now entirely unraveled. Jake sat slumped in his chair, his earlier arrogance replaced with the grim realization that there would be no salvaging this night. Matt stood, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, everyone," he said with quiet finality. "I'm done here." Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving Sophie and Jake to sit in the ruins of their deceit, surrounded by the judgment of the people they had thought they could fool. Court went to the window and glanced out toward the harbor. It looked like the fugitives were already aboard. The aftermath of Matt's explosive revelation left the dinner party in stunned silence. The air was thick with an awkward tension that no one dared to break. Sophie sat frozen, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief, while Jake slouched in his chair, avoiding the gazes of the other guests. Matt's exit had been both a condemnation and an absolution. He had walked away from the wreckage, leaving Sophie and Jake to grapple with the consequences of their actions. As the door clicked shut behind Matt, Laura, Sophie's closest friend, finally spoke. Her voice was low, laced with a mix of pity and anger. "Sophie, how could you do this? To Matt, of all people." Sophie looked up, her eyes wide with desperation. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. I didn't think." "That's exactly the problem," Laura interrupted sharply. "You didn't think. You didn't think about Matt, about what this would do to him, to everyone." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she quickly composed herself. "We came here to celebrate your marriage. And this," she gestured at the stack of evidence still sitting on the table, "is what you had hidden beneath it all? And isn't that what most people who are suffering from depression experience?" Laura interrupted. Jake, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look," he began, his voice defensive. "This is a private matter between Sophie and Matt. I don't think—" "No," another guest interjected, cutting him off. It was Paul, one of Matt's oldest friends. His tone was cold, his eyes fixed on Jake with disdain. "You made it public the moment you walked through that door, knowing full well what you were doing. Don't pretend this doesn't affect all of us." Now, the other guests murmured in agreement, their unease turning into quiet condemnation. Sophie looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Even those who had been closest to her now wore expressions of shock and betrayal. "This is unbelievable," Laura continued, standing up from the table. "We've all supported you and Matt through everything, career changes, health scares, even that rough patch a few years ago. And this is how you repay him? Sophie's tears fell freely now. I made a mistake, she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Jake scoffed under his breath, drawing attention to himself. Mistake? He muttered, his tone laced with bitterness. You didn't seem to think it was a mistake when you were texting me. The room fell silent again as everyone absorbed the venom in Jake's words. Sophie turned to him, her expression a mix of shock and betrayal. You're one to talk, she snapped. You pushed for this. You made me feel like— Don't, Jake cut her off, his voice cold. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. You knew exactly what you were doing. The tension between the two was palpable, their affair unraveling in front of the very people who had once celebrated their lives. The guests began to rise, one by one, gathering their belongings and muttering excuses to leave. I think we've seen enough, Paul said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He looked at Sophie one last time, disappointment etched across his face. You should think about what you've done, Sophie, because you've lost more than just Matt tonight. As the guests trickled out, Sophie was left alone at the table, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The once beautiful dining room, with its elegant centerpiece and carefully arranged place settings, now felt like a stage for her humiliation. Jake, sensing the isolation, stood to leave. Wait, Sophie said, her voice trembling. You can't just— Jake shrugged, his earlier confidence replaced with weariness. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered, heading for the door. Good luck fixing it. When the door closed behind him, Sophie sank back into her chair, her sobs the only sound in the room. Meanwhile, Matt walked the darkened streets of their neighborhood, his thoughts racing. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, but the emotional toll was heavier than he had anticipated. He felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness, relief that the truth was out, and sadness for the life he thought he had, the love he believed was real. By the time he reached the park where he and Sophie used to take their morning walks, his phone buzzed. It was Laura. Matt? Her voice was soft but firm. I just wanted to say, we're here for you, all of us. If you need anything, help moving, a place to stay, just say the word. Thanks, Laura, Matt replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I appreciate it. He hung up and sat on a bench, staring out at the empty playground. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of solitude. Not the suffocating loneliness of betrayal, but the kind of solitude that offers clarity. He wasn't tied to Sophie's lies anymore. He was free to rebuild, to redefine what he wanted from life. As dawn broke on the horizon, Matt stood, his decision made. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, he felt ready to walk it, alone, but whole.